I'm not naive to the realities. I mean, I accept reluctantly some of the realities. We do live in a place.
Well, I would notice, let me point this out, and I think it's very interesting, because Ray calls in, and usually a majority of our listeners really disagree with Ray.
And he likes that.
Well, I guess. He likes stirring it up. We know that. And we do appreciate that sometimes, too.
We need that.
Makes the show better.
Absolutely.
But have you noticed the number of people that I would consider would be very much in disagreement with Ray on most issues are agreeing on this issue, at least the principle of, okay, we are here. Now, we may disagree on, is there anything we can do about it? Should we do anything about it?
I'm not disagreeing that we're not here. Maybe I'm not being crystal clear myself. I don't disagree with socialism integrating itself into our model of capitalism. I'm not disagreeing with that. I think Medicare, Medicaid, I think a lot of other government entitlement programs, some of the SNAP, a lot of these other things are modified versions of socialism. It is redistributionism, collectivism, bordering on socialism. I want to make clear, I'm not naive to that. I'm probably more aware than the majority of you are as to how involved policies have been in redistribute whatever wealth. And Obamacare was a huge piece of legislation. And if you really think about the belief that we had 60 senators, 60 supermajority, willing to vote for the socializing of the healthcare system in America. I'm not arguing that healthcare hasn't turned into something different than a free market, that retirement has turned into something different than a free market, that a lot of things in America. What I'm arguing is, are there consequences, and are we prepared for those consequences? The Soviet Union no longer exists. In Venezuela, they're buying, you can't find a loaf of bread. You can't get a warm meal. I mean, we know the travesties of Cuba. What I'm arguing, Rev, is there is precedent here to clearly demonstrate to the majority of us what happens if we go too far down this road. I'm not arguing whether or not we're traveling down this road. I don't believe we're a socialist nation. I still believe that our economy is predicated and built upon incentives. The more productive you are, the more benefit you enjoy. The less productive you are, the less benefit you enjoy. I still believe that our economy operates on that general premise and notion. I accept some of the imperfections. I accept some of the realities that frustrate me and I find confounding. What I'm talking about is one of the two major political parties apparently believe that it is a reasonable way to govern a country. I'm not saying how we got here or how far down the road we are or whether or not we're here. What I'm arguing is you've got one party in America today that believes it is a reasonable and legitimate way to govern our country's affairs. And if you are any student of history and you understand the consequences of the failed policies of any version of socialism, Democrat socialism, communism, all of these other collectivist redistributionist policies always end up in a bad place. That's what I'm arguing. I'm arguing, okay, we've made a decision that we're going to allow ourselves to be something a little bit different than what our founders intended us to be. Do we understand the consequences of those decisions? I mean, look at health care. Health care would be the best example. Look at the American Community Reinvestment Act. I mean, that was socializing the housing industry. It was good for realtors. It was good for builders. It was good for banks for a while, but it manipulated the free market. Healthcare would be another example of completely and totally manipulating the free market. All I'm saying is, are we prepared for what lies ahead? Is there a day? Is there a day of reckoning? I believe there is. And I believe that the issues relating to socialism center around one word, and that is debt. Because to Roger's point, there aren't enough rich people to give other people exactly what they want. There's not enough high-income earners. You can't take enough of their money to give everybody in America what they want. And I do worry. I worry a lot, and I read a lot about these college-educated millennials. You want to see where the hot spot in socialism is? It is the college-educated millennial. That is the group of people who, for whatever reason, and I've got a fairly strong theory of that, I think college campuses are breeding grounds for this sort of liberal thought. And I don't have a problem with liberalism, Rev. I really don't. I understand the yin and yang of conservatism and liberalism, of big government and a small government. I get that. That's always been a part of our political discourse. What I fail to understand is how reasonable people, rational people, legitimate thinkers believe we can do this and pay no consequence. And when I hear, and you know, I think the world of Ray. I mean, we disagree, and I got hot with him this morning. He gets hot with me other mornings. I don't understand how he can say, well, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, that's where we're headed. There's nothing we can do about it. There's got to be something we can do about it. It's got to be addressed, because if it's not addressed, your kids, my kids, your grandkids, and my grandkids will deal with a very different America. And the only way I think we get off the hook is if debt doesn't matter. Because we're heading to 30 trillion in debt, and then 40 trillion in debt. And the only way you can fund the sort of government that some of these college-age millennials or college graduate millennials want, the only way you can fund that government is to tax people at 80 or 90% or borrow the money. That's my complaint. That's my concern. It's not how far down this road we've gone and how much further we got to go. But the problem is, what does it cost to go down this road? How much money does it take to give everybody Medicare? How much money does it take to give everybody free college? How much money does it take to give everybody a government-ordained job? We don't have that much money. No country in the history of the planet has ever had that much money. But for some reason, there's a group of people in America that believe we can figure it out. And there is no figuring that out. That's why socialism fails. Margaret Thatcher said it so eloquently. Sooner or later, you run out of other people's money. And if we're arrogant enough to think that, well, the red, white, and blue model of socialism will be better than the European or the communist model, no, it is what it is. It is a system that ignores incentives. And human nature is based on incentivized. What incents me to get out of the bed? What incents you to do better at your job? What incents Alec to want to be an aspiring broadcaster? And I think once you remove that, once you squelch that, once you deviate from that, you have serious struggles and problems that lie ahead. Once again, I wish my kids could have free health care. And I want to put on your grandparent hat on for a second. There is a number there, and my generation may not answer to it. We may get off the hook. We may be able to run up $35 trillion of debt and it really not mean a damn thing. There's a chance that whoever out there navigates those waters and negotiates those issues, they may have their arms around the fact that we can get away with 30 or $35 trillion in debt. Now, for the life of me, I don't understand it, but I'm not smart enough nor academic enough to understand that. But what happens when that number exceeds what our capacity really and truly is? What happens then? I mean, what happens to all these socialist experiences or experiments we're trying within our free market economy? What happens when they tell your grandkid, Rev, that there is no food at the grocery store? And see, Americans are so arrogant. I mean, we've got example after example after example after example around the world. I mean, what happens when we get to $30 trillion and your kids are told by the federal government, the IRS, that, hey, on your $60,000 a year income, we're going to charge you a 60% marginal tax rate. And when you go to McDonald's to buy your hamburger today, we're going to charge you a 25% sales tax. That's where we're headed. We're in the middle of the largest debt bubble in the history of mankind. And we act like it doesn't matter. And our response is this, Rev. Well, I mean, it's just happening. You know, where the horses left the barn. I mean, this is not whether or not we elect a Republican president. This is not whether or not we elect a Democrat Congress. This is about whether or not we forsake the future of our kids and grandkids in the name of socialism. And if you really believe that's what this country's about, then I got a problem with that. And I'm not going to sit idly by and accept the realities And I'm not naive to the realities, but I'm not going to sit idly by and say, well, I mean, sometimes it just bees like that. That's just the way it is, Ken. I mean, we made this decision back in the New Deal. We ended up here. We'll end up there. Someday the bell will ring, and someday somebody will want their money. I have no idea when. I have no idea how much, and I've made that crystal clear. But someday that will happen. Maybe Richard doesn't deal with it. Maybe Ray doesn't deal with it. Maybe I don't deal with it. Maybe Roger doesn't deal with it. But somebody, somewhere, someday is going to deal with it. And shame on us for just saying, well, I mean, that's the way it is, Ken. You know, health care, the government got involved in it. You know, retirement, the government got involved in it. College, the government got involved with college debt and all these things. I mean, you know how the government is. Okay. Tell your grandkids that. Tell your grandkids that when someday somebody looks them in the eyes and says, look, we need 60% of your salary to settle this problem we've got. We need 70% of your salary. We need 25% sales tax on every economic transaction you make. That's my argument. My argument is not whether or not we're heading that way. I think it is obvious we are heading that way. My point is, what do we do when we get there? You got a plurality, a large plurality of a certain political party who believe that socialism is the way this country should be governed. They have no comprehension nor understanding and are completely oblivious to the consequence of what socialism will cost the productive people in an economy.
Are they blind to, say, Venezuela as an example of what socialism, when you get there to where it doesn't work anymore, what happens?
I'm sure they're blind.
I mean, the stories now are terrible.
Well, I mean, give me an example. And Ray talked about the Scandinavian countries yesterday. He didn't talk about them today because we know how the Scandinavian countries make it work. I mean, Denmark and Sweden, I can go over the numbers again. I mean, they do make that system work, but they make it on the back. I mean, I want to, for clarity's sake, understand this. In Denmark and Sweden, they have free health care. Hold on to that. In Denmark and Sweden, they have free health care. In Denmark and Sweden, if you make 1.20% of the median of the national average in income. So hypothetically, if we apply the same rules to America as are applied in Denmark, and the average salary in America is $50,000 a year, and you make $60,000, that's 1.2% of the national average. Your marginal tax rate is 60.4%. Is that free health care? No. And that goes back to the misnomer. That is the complete misconception. There is nothing for free. When Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez run around the countryside saying free health care, free this, there is nothing in the world that is free. There may be things to you, Rev, that you don't have to pay for. Alec, there may be things to you that you don't have to pay for. There may be things to me that I don't have to pay for. But somebody somewhere pays the bill. And as technically the last year of the baby boomer, probably a part of the most consumptive generation of the history of mankind, we're going to leave the bill with somebody. And I'm not going to sit idly by and allow us to have a conversation and the answer and the response consistently and traditionally, well, I mean, that's just the way it is. There's nothing we can do about it. We made a decision 25 years ago or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years ago to head down this road, and that's the way it is. That's easy for us to say. It's going to be real hard for a generation of people to deal with one day. And why we think America's immune to the same misgivings of socialist experiments all over the world is beyond me. It's the arrogance of the American culture. The American people have this perception that we're invincible, that we can weather any storm. Well, reality will be reality at some point in time. And so I want to make crystal clear, and we'll leave here and go to something else. I'm not naive to where we're headed. I am completely and totally aware of how involved the government has become in the free market. I'm arguing that there will be major consequences at some point in time for that involvement. That we all agree borders on socialism.